This week, we found out that the SCOTUS is apparently on the brink of getting rid of Roe v. Wade, and that has scared a lot of people, understandably so. And many have been left wondering, so what do we do to protect those rights? And one of the paths that people have discussed for some time is amending the Constitution to enshrine reproductive rights directly into the document, making it impossible for the Supreme Court to declare them to be unconstitutional. But that would be a very difficult path. Some say impossible. And joining us now to discuss how that might go, Deputy Editor for Insider. Welcome back to the show, Dave Levinthal.
Hey, thanks, John, for having me here on this very, very momentous week, to say the least.
It is. And we're talking about something different than we normally do, although I'm sure at some point we're gonna be talking about campaign finance as it relates to this issue. But for now, we're talking about the constitutional amendment. And so you've got to write up about why it would be not just difficult, but you declare next to impossible. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, effectively, we are getting as mathematically close to zero as possible, even under the best of political circumstances. If everyone in the United States was locking arms and singing Kumbaya, we would have almost the most difficult scenario that you could imagine in terms of amending the Constitution. And here in 2022, we don't have anything close to that. So the notion of being able to amend the Constitution for this purpose or any purpose is pretty much out the door. And one little bit of trivia is, when was the last time that we even amended the Constitution? Well, it was about 30 years ago, and it was something that had actually been kicking around Washington, D.C., kid you not, for more than 200 years before enough states got behind it to ratify that amendment, and it became the 27th Amendment. And if you wonder what that was, it actually had to do with the pay of members of Congress, that they couldn't increase or decrease their pay during the course of one single congressional term.
Exactly, and I know we arguably got close to one with the process for the Equal Rights Amendment, but that hasn't, as of now, become an amendment to the Constitution. So it is difficult. Now, of course, there are two paths to it. So you're saying both paths, either through the Senate or through the states, doesn't really matter. That would be very, very difficult at this point.
Yeah, they're basically different sides of the same coin of impossibility. So let's break them down very quickly. First of all, in the Senate and the House, you would need, in both sides, 2/3 of a vote in order to move forward with a constitutional amendment proposal. So we can't get anything, 2/3 on any issue in the Senate or the House these days. So something like abortion, the idea that both the House and the Senate could agree on something, a constitutional amendment proposal related to abortion, is just strictly fantasy. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that indeed that did happen, that both the House and the Senate and their 2/3 majorities advanced a constitutional amendment. Well, then it would have to go to the states, all 50 of them, and 3/4 of state legislatures would have to ratify that amendment. So we are talking about the highest of high bars here, politically speaking, governmentally speaking, for any constitutional amendment, and that's why the impossible nature of this all is so very real on this particular issue, in light of the Supreme Court's reveal that Roe v. Wade is likely going to be a thing of the past.
Yeah, and I know for a lot of people that's incredibly frustrating, because they see the polls, they know that people consistently, going back many, many years, haven't favored it being overturned. They've almost without fail voted, a majority has voted for presidents who say that they will preserve the rights, and yet we end up with a Supreme Court that's predominantly conservatives who are opposed to those rights. And you can find majorities in many of these states, but regardless, again, as you pointed out, the bar in some areas is very high. In your research about this, where you come to the conclusion that this path might not work. Were there others that groups or individuals were talking about that might have a greater chance of succeeding on some level?
Well, there's two, and number one is that second prong to amending the Constitution, which would be to have a nationwide constitutional convention. Now, that would be something that could be initiated by the states themselves. You would need 2/3 of the states to do that, but ultimately, if that convention was to happen, and none has happened for any constitutional amendment, and mind you, John, there have been 12,000 roughly constitutional amendment proposals put up over the course of the United States history, only 27 amendments, so do the math there. But let's say we had a constitutional convention. Even if somehow everyone was to agree on some sort of constitutional amendment out of that convention, and it could be an amendment proposal that was supporting Roe v. Wade. It could be against Roe v. Wade too. So you got to remember Republicans during the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, even into the 2000s, they were advancing what they basically called a life amendment to not enshrine Roe v. Wade, but to prevent Roe v. Wade from happening through a constitutional solution, in their opinion. So yeah, a state convention, it would still, any proposal that came out of that, a constitutional convention, would still need 3/4 of all the state legislatures to ratify that as well for it to happen. So that is one thing that is being talked about a little bit, not gonna happen. The other thing that is being talked about very urgently, in fact, and Chuck Schumer even just today has come out very much in support of the idea of what they're calling codifying Roe. Okay, well, what does that mean? Codifying Roe basically means passing a law that, in essence, would say Roe v. Wade is the law of the land. And even if the Supreme Court says something different, well, we're gonna, in Congress, pass a law. Well, there's a couple problems with that. Number one, you could have a situation where that law ultimately was fought and deemed unconstitutional. Secondly, too, legislatures change. Congresses, they go for votes every 2 years. And the Democrats right now, who hold the House and hold the Senate, very well, if we're having this conversation about 9 or 10 months from now, they could be in the minority, and the Republicans who would be in power could pass a different bill. So it's not a durable solution. It's not a lasting type of response to what would be potentially a Supreme Court decision that tears down Roe.
Yeah. A quick follow up to that. So to even get that temporary solution, it would have to get past an obvious implied filibuster, of course. And enough Democrats have said that they're not going to get rid of the filibuster for anything. They're never going to. Kirsten Sinema is never going to budge. She doesn't care. Have you seen any indication that the Senate might at least force them to actually filibuster it, to not instantly filibuster, it's gone, we're moving on to other business, like actually make them, Mr. Smith goes to Washington, hold the floor, read Green Eggs and Ham? Are they at least talking at all about that?
Yeah, there's a possibility for very high drama. I mean, the Democrats right now, they know that they're not going to be able to get this bill through. They know that they're not going to be able to take down the filibuster. They tried for months to try to take down the filibuster so that they could push voting rights legislation through. Well, that didn't work. So there's no indication, no reason to believe that that's going to happen with the issue of abortion in the here and now, with the Constitution of the Senate being what it is. So yeah, is there going to be some theater? I would expect that. Is there going to be some drama? I would expect that. And I think Chuck Schumer is very motivated to, number one, get as many people on record, which would be the whole of the Senate if he has his way, saying, all right, I am for this or I am against this. And probably going to be some very, very pointed and long and very colorful speeches that are given around this bill, which could in fact come as soon as next week.
Okay, well, at least we've got that to look forward to, I guess. Anyway, as always, Dave, I want to thank you for joining us on the show. Everyone watching this, by the way, you should be following Dave's work. He's got a page at Insider. You can see all the work that comes out. And also, where can they follow you on social media?
Twitter, Dave Levinthal, at Dave Levinthal, and that's Levinthal.
Thank you, Dave. Always glad to have you on.
Thanks, John.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.